Life comes with a lot of decisions, and it can be hard to know the right path sometimes. A therapist can help you map out what you really want, so you trust yourself to make great choices and feel excited about the future. BetterHelp offers convenient professional online therapy on your schedule, however you want it, by phone, chat, or video call. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/positive today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/positive.
Being a baseball play-by-play broadcaster demands a blend of learned mechanics, intense preparation, and a calm sense of entertainment. How hard is it to do this job? Let's talk to the ones who do it. This is Matt Spiegel. My new podcast, The PBP, Voices of Baseball, will bring those conversations to you as the best working and former broadcasters tell you why and how they do it. New episodes come every Thursday all summer long. Follow The PBP, Voices of Baseball, on the Odyssey app or wherever you find your podcasts.
Tommy Castor. This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome back in, everybody. It's Sports Daily. It's Albrecht and Castor. It's Monday of All-Star Week, and we're having some fun, spending a little time on topics here as we get ready for the Home Run Derby, the All-Star Game, probably the trade deadline heating up really for the first time. We've seen a few trades, but it is time to really ramp that up here across the Major League Baseball landscape. Glad to be with you here on this day as well. Bob Huggins news coming up in just a little bit. We want to wrap on Blake Mitchell, though, Tommy, and something we didn't bring up, and so we'll sort of finish with this for now. Unless we have callers to the IAP hotline, we're willing to jump around a little bit over the next week or so. But the Royals will almost certainly save on Blake Mitchell, Tommy, which is a strategy in the Major League Baseball draft, and it's one that makes it really hard to follow. We haven't really touched on this piece of it, is that you take him maybe a little above where he was projected in order to sign him for a little less than your slot value. And in baseball, what you can then do is you can draft riskier signing players later and offer them more in order to entice them away from college. So, as an example, was it last year or the year before? The Rangers took Kumar Rocker pretty far ahead of where he was being projected. They took him, I think he was being projected like in the 30s, and they took him in the teens or something. Well, what they did was they signed him for less than slot value, because in baseball, the amount you sign for is sort of slotted in there. So they signed him for less than that, and then turned around and took the top high school pitcher who nobody thought would sign, paid him more. He did sign, and I don't remember his name. But that's how they maneuvered that. And then afterwards, when everyone at first was like, God, they reached on Kumar Rocker, then at the end of it, they were like, yeah, that was actually pretty savvy. They got very lucky to be able to do that, quite frankly, but it worked. And so I don't know if the Royals have that plan. From what I can tell, the next player that they took, Blake Walters, who's a high school pitcher, who's a fine prospect, was not that kind of player that had like maybe signability issues. So they could still be kicking that money even further down the road to try and strengthen an entire draft class versus, spend it all on one pick because there's an obvious pick. That's the other thing, too, for the Royals there. There wasn't a real obvious pick, I don't think, at that spot. We mentioned Teal. He slid down to 14. So clearly there was, not, consensus on his ranking either, because he went quite a bit further down than people thought he would. But the slot value of this, that's something that'll take a little time to understand, but it is another strategy and not one that I hate for the Royals, who do need strength by numbers too.
I understand the way that strategy works, and a lot of teams do it, all the time. They're going and they're reaching on some players to try to sign them for less, so then they can go out and have money available to entice, a player that maybe is on the fence about going to the pros or going to college. and try to get them to come to the organization. I get that. I understand that that's a strategy unique to baseball and the baseball draft. I get all of that. I think that really to sum up my thoughts on all of this, and again, it's not really about Blake Mitchell. I'm sure, he's clearly a great player. He clearly was a high school phenom, winning 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year in a state where there's really, really good baseball in the state of Texas. So it's not about him at all. It's not a knock on him. But to sum up the entire thing, I do think it's okay to reach for a guy you really like and to take a gamble on a guy you really like. And there are teams that historically draft really well and develop really well. My favorite team, the Atlanta Braves, back in the 90s, they had an amazing farm system. And that's how they, won 14 or 15 straight division titles
by the way.
In the 90s and early. Right. But that was really the recipe for success. So they could reach for players, and they kind of got the benefit of the doubt because they had such a solid farm system and a track record in developing players at a really high level. The Royals don't have the benefit of the doubt. They've historically drafted terribly in the last 5 or 6 years, and they haven't developed players well at all. So to me, this is more of an indictment on the Royals than it is about a high school catcher named Blake Mitchell, who could project to be a great player.
What's
I
crazy?
I don't think the Royals have earned the benefit of the doubt at this point.
No. And what's crazy about you bringing up the Braves, because where did Dayton Moore, come up?
Came from the Braves. He was the disciple of John Sherholz.
He was a part of that system. That's what, again, like to take a step back and speak to the degree of difficulty involved in this at the baseball level. Dayton Moore, who was at the absolute center of what you just talked about, came over to Kansas City early on. I think did a pretty good job drafting, identifying, and it just didn't go well lately.
But you know who the GM of the Royals was when they had a great farm system in the 80s? John Sherholz, who then went to the Braves and had a long run, So there's been a lot of Braves-Royals connections over the last 30 years as far as like front office and, scouting and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so it was fun, too. I saw in the Rangers draft room, Chris Young brought Dayton Moore over to the Rangers. Chris Young's now the GM in Texas, and it was I stood out. It's his hair and that he's not very tall. I was like, that's Dayton Moore. I forgot they brought him in there. So here's something else. And Randy Jesse Early pointed this out, who follows the Royals and does a great job. There are some things about Mitchell in high school that, and the Royals put this in their release, that do make him a little different than most high school hitters. One, he had an on-base percentage, Tommy, of above 700, which is quite simply he was on base in high school more than 70% of the time. His walk-to-strikeout ratio was 51-8. So during the break here, Kyle Teal, who everyone wanted the Royals to take, I've gone back, and the University of Virginia has, the highlights of, for whatever reason they don't mention his senior year. I don't know if he got hurt or something. But as a junior, he hit .574, 8 home runs, 31 RBIs, on-base percentage of .678, and a not as good walk-to-strikeout ratio as Blake Mitchell. Right? And Blake Mitchell had a lower batting average, but more power, a better walk-to-strikeout ratio, better OPS, better on-base percentage. So basically, what I'm saying is Blake Mitchell was a better high school baseball player, by the way, in the state of Texas instead of New Jersey, which is where Kyle Teal played. So the competition was probably at a higher level, I'll assume. But Blake Mitchell was basically a better high school player than Kyle Teal was. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Kyle Teal. All I'm saying is Kyle Teal played well at college, but if he's that kind of player and Blake Mitchell is a better hitter at the high school level, doesn't that have some value?
Sure it does. Well, yeah, absolutely it does. And, like we've talked about this entire show, Blake Mitchell has the pedigree and the stats to be a really, really good ball player. He already is, but a really good ball player at the highest level. He's got that. And you know what? If it had been, 29 other teams in Major League Baseball drafting him, maybe not 29, but a good portion of other teams in Major League Baseball drafting Blake Mitchell, then I would say, man, they'll be able to develop him and he's going to be a star. I'm just not sure I believe that the Royals are going to be able to do that.
But if we're just looking at pedigree, and Teal, who I agree has the chances of him making the big leagues are sky high. Like I would say it's going to happen. If we like him, and I did, and I thought that's who the Royals were going to take, by the way. But there's a player who at a comparable level had better numbers against higher competition. It would be like, taking a single A player, if they were both playing single A and one just had better numbers, right? Like if you what can you compare? It's not totally fair, but I think it does have merit and value when you talk about those players directly up against each other. Again, I'm not saying Blake Mitchell was the right pick. I'm saying upside is the right strategy, though.
I do also think, and this is complete conjecture from my part, I've got no proof to back this up, but I was thinking about this last night, that if you're looking at a succession plan at catcher for the Kansas City Royals after Salvador Perez, if they had taken Kyle Teal, my thought process would have been, okay, they're probably going to hang on to Salvador Perez and not trade him at the trade deadline. Have him play a couple of more years for Kansas City, and then have a succession plan for a big league catcher ready to go and Kyle Teal ready to take over. Now that it's Blake Mitchell, who by all accounts that we've talked about, he doesn't have to play catcher, and he's going to probably need a little bit more time to develop. I do think it's still on the table that the Royals move Salvador Perez at the trade deadline and they look elsewhere for their catcher of the future. It's not necessarily Blake Mitchell. He could play any position, right? So I know it's hard to connect the dots from the MLB draft when you're talking about potentially years away and prospects and risk and all of that. Where like in the NFL draft, if you draft a first rounder, you're probably slotting him in to start right away in year one. It's different in Major League Baseball. So you have to kind of stretch your thought a little bit when you're trying to connect those dots. But I do think that you can make that connection a little bit with the future of Salvador Perez.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a fool's errand for the Royals to be worried about the succession plan for Salvador Perez. All the Royals need to be doing at this moment in time is getting the best players that they can get, no matter where they play, no matter what it is. You see teams do that. You hear it. Teams there. This organization puts an emphasis on center fielders and shortstops because they know they're great athletes. That drives me nuts. Like, can they hit? I don't care how fast they are or how many balls they can track down in center field. If they can't hit, they're never going to reach the big league level anyway. Like, I'm only interested, for the most part, at least at the top of my list, in what I'm interested in drafting positionally, not for pitchers, but for position players, is can they hit? Because if they can't hit, they're not going to make the big leagues anyway. So if you take this tall, fast, toolsy kid who's a 290 hitter in high school, but man, he can run really fast. I don't have much interest in that. Those guys don't pan out very often. I need stat fillers, right? I need kids that can just smash the ball in high school, that are impossible to get out, that are whatever, because they're the ones that are going to even reach the big league level. The Royals don't have any business thinking about anybody's succession plan right now. All they need to do is collect as much talent as they can collect and then figure it out later, right? Because they're not in a position to be drafting based on position. They're not good enough for that.
You're right, and I would say, generally speaking, when you're looking at the draft, yes, that's correct, and I agree with that. At 8 overall, I think that you can have an idea on where you want this person to be plugged in and what the timeline is. I mean, think of Bobby Witt Jr., right? They drafted him with a clear plan of when he was going to be in the majors. And I think that it was rushed a little bit, because of the state of the Royals organization.
Because they thought they would be good.
Yeah. But if you're drafting a player at 8 overall, you should have a pretty good idea on your timeline on when you want him in the majors and what position you want him to play. And so if it was somebody that was proven like a Kyle Teal coming out of college, I think that timeline would tell me that he is the heir apparent to Salvador Perez. I think it's a little bit different with Blake Mitchell.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions because I'm curious about this. Because I went into last night with, like, clean slate, don't know anything about anybody outside of the top 5. I had looked into the top 5. If everything about Blake Mitchell was the exact same, but he was a third baseman and not a catcher, would you be down on this pick, do you think?
I don't know if I would be down on the pick, but I would still have the same reservations about the Royals' development of a high school player. And Bobby Witt Jr., I mean, I think that he's the exception to the rule because he was so far along even as a high schooler that it's really difficult to screw up the raw talent like Bobby Witt Jr.
Well, they don't have the problem is they don't have a good sample size. Nick Pratto, I think it's still too early to say whether his development is good or bad. I think before this year, we all thought it was pretty good, actually. And then Frank Mazzucato a couple years ago. Those are the only 2 high schoolers they've taken in the last 6 years. And Mazzucato looks okay, and Pratto looks okay. They've certainly had a better, I'll say it this way, they've certainly had a better track record in the last 6 years developing high schoolers than college players. There's no question about that.
Sure, and I wonder how much of that, and I don't know, I'm not an expert in this world, but I wonder how much of that is that a player coming out of college has had, more years of playing in a system. And I don't know if then the Royals are like, hey, you got to change everything you're doing. Like, I wonder if it's because like a high schooler's more raw and you can try to craft them. I don't really know exactly the way that works. I think at the end of the day, like I said before, I just don't have a lot of faith in the Royals' ability to develop a player like Blake Mitchell, especially if that player like Blake Mitchell may end up changing positions. Like if you're locked into one position and that's what you know and you're good at that, then I've got maybe a little bit more faith in the Royals being able to develop him. But if you're trying to get him to play a brand new position, man, I'm not sure I've got a lot of faith in that.
Let me be perfectly clear. I don't have any faith in the Royals developing any player at any position at any level because they haven't done it well lately. Again, the picks that they took in those years of the rebuild, the college pitchers, universally considered safe, good. Like, I don't trust them to develop anybody right now.
Right.
So, again, I just want the most talented player that I can possibly get at that point. And I don't know if Blake Mitchell's that because I don't know anything about who's around him, right?
You go back 10 years ago, the Royals had the 8th overall pick, and they picked Hunter Dozier. And I'm not sure that we would – I mean, he made the big leagues and, had a
I don't know
couple
that
of
I'd call
flashes.
Hunter Dozier a total flop, by the way. I
don't think he was either. But, I mean, at 8 overall, I don't think you maybe would have liked to see a little bit of a longer tenure, a longer career, and more successful.
Bubba Starling, probably a better look at somebody that didn't do very well. That didn't really work out. But they've had – look, again, go look at every team across baseball's first-round picks. Like, it's a brutal exercise to try and do it. If you go back 20 years, most of their best players, whether it be Zach Greinke, Billy Butler, Moustakas and Hosmer, we already mentioned. Mike Montgomery had just a
probably
second
on that
there.
list.
Most of those guys are high schoolers. They've had far more very good players develop, whether it was by them or somebody else in a trade, by guys that they've drafted out of high school than guys they've drafted out of college. They're fine college players too. It's both, but it's more high school if you go back 20 years. But going back 20 years doesn't make a lot of sense because it's the organization's totally different now. Yeah. What bugs me about the Blake Mitchell thing is everybody's hung up on the fact that in recent years high school catchers, I don't care if he's a catcher or a DH or a third baseman or a right fielder. Can he hit? And yes, he can. And he hit at a better level than, everybody that the Royals thought they should take. At a comparable level, he was a better player at that point than Teal was for Virginia. I'm not saying he's going to be a better player. I'm just saying, like, that stuff matters and is relative. Don't just hate the pick because the guy plays catcher. That is the least important part of this. Now, they like him as a catcher, just to be clear. Like, he projects okay as a catcher. There was, different scouts had different opinions on him as a catcher. It's not that the Royals don't like him as a catcher. He may very well be a catcher. I don't know. I just don't care. I want to know if he can hit. And the other thing he can do is pitch, which is a fallback option sometimes for players that throw really, really hard like he does, is, there's almost like a backup plan of, well, if it doesn't work here, then maybe you could still be a bullpen piece. That does factor into, and I do think that matters as far as risk reward, right? I think your risk goes down if there's two different paths to the big leagues potentially for a player. Not saying he's going to be Shohei Ohtani. That's not what I'm saying at all. But Alexia Gondo. Do you remember Alexia Gondo?
Sure.
He was for Oakland, I think, first, and then Texas and somebody else. I don't remember exactly who he came up with. But he was I think he was a outfielder for most of his minor league career, and right at the end it wasn't working, switched to be a pitcher, and he was really important to some really good teams as a pitcher. So that's not out of the question either, that a guy that is a really high-quality pitcher as a backup plan. Maybe that mitigates some of the risk. I don't know. I mean, I'm not in that room. I'm not sure. But it's not a bad thing to have in the back pocket.
Yeah, I mean, versatility in today's game is so much more important than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. When you've got the ascension of Shohei Ohtani, and of course, like you mentioned, like, we're not saying that Blake Mitchell is Shohei Ohtani or anything, but versatility is important. The universal DH is there. And I think having players be able to project in a bunch of different roles, that's important. And we've seen a handful of players that have a lot of success in the big leagues today by playing multiple positions, and you can move them all around the diamond.
I'm just looking. There's also, and I hadn't seen this until now, people are freaking out because Mitchell has the same birthday as Bubba Starling.
Yikes. Yeah, that's not good.
That's funny. It's fine. I don't look. The people talking about it follow this far closer than I do. He throws 97 on the mound, by the way. I don't care if he's a catcher. I care if he can hit, and he has at that level, at a pretty high level. But so does everybody that get drafted at the top of the draft. So I don't know, man. It's fun to look at this. I hope that the Royals get one right, because they've gotten so many wrong lately, and it's a shame. It's too bad. This is why I think the lottery will be a good thing, by the way, for teams like the Royals that don't just mail it in like the Astros did. The lottery will fix that. So love it or hate it, teams like the Royals who try to stay competitive in rebuilds will be rewarded through the lottery long term. Not in the short term. It's going to bite them in the short term, but in the long term it will. 869-1240, Huggy Bear. What in the world's going on in West Virginia? That's next on Sports Daily. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 coming to Boulevard Theaters in Wichita. You can check it out a day early. We're giving away a pair of tickets for a special screening this Thursday, July 13th, 7 o'clock, Boulevard Theaters at Town West. We'll give away that pair right now to our first caller on the IHOP hotline. 869-1240 is that number. So good luck to our competitors in that contest. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning this Thursday. Welcome back into Sports Daily. Jacob Albrock, Tommy Castor. So the Bob Huggins story, Tommy, I keep making the joke that I guess his, letter writer is the same one that San Diego State used. Like, you write this letter of resignation and then you immediately be like, oh, I didn't, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean I was resigning. This is a mess. I don't get it. From Bob Huggins' standpoint, by all accounts, Bob Huggins had a team meeting telling his players he was resigning. Like, what are you doing here, Huggins?
I'm not sure he understands what the word resign means. I truly wonder if he actually knows what that word means. Because there was an email that was, I guess, sent to the University of West Virginia from his wife's account saying, accept this formal notice of resignation. He told his team he was resigning. I wonder if he just doesn't know what that word actually means, because now his attorneys are saying that he never formally resigned. Well, yeah, you kind of did. So, I mean, I have a feeling that this may play out in court, but I'm not sure that Huggins has any legs to stand on here.
He doesn't, especially if he had a team meeting talking about his, resignation. What I think is happening here is it's desperate. Huggins doesn't want to be done coaching. It's very sad because Huggins doesn't want to be done coaching. I think he's clearly still good at it. He had an unbelievable transfer class coming in, but it's like the incident on the radio with the slurs that make absolutely no sense to go that direction, like out of nowhere, like what? And then the DUI, it's just desperate. Like you resign, I think reality sets in that like, man, that's it. And you call a lawyer and be like, how can we make this, like, how do we turn this back around? Like, I don't want to be done coaching. And this is the path you take. You say, I didn't write that letter. My wife wrote that letter. So it's not an official resignation. Oh, okay. We disagree. And you met with your team, by the way, to tell them that you were resigning. So legally standing, any one of those people in that locker room can get up on the stand and be like, yeah, he totally had a meeting and told us he was resigning.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think, what's really sad about all of this is that, West Virginia is Bob Huggins' alma mater. And, I remember him leaving Kansas State after one season because he wanted to go back home. He wanted to be with his alma mater. And, it was a match made in heaven. And I think everybody, it's something special when a coach goes back home, goes back to their alma mater to be able to coach and finish out their career at a place like that. And what was a match made in heaven is going to get ugly. It already has gotten ugly, unfortunately. And you know what? I usually don't take the side of universities on things. I feel bad for West Virginia in all of this because they had to go through and, figure out what they wanted to do after the slurs on the radio. And they defended him. They basically, they punished him, but they defended him. And at the time, I think people thought, well, that's kind of a weak punishment. But, Bob Huggins is beloved in Morgantown. And then the DUI. And then at that point, it's like, what are you going to do? What can you do? You have to get rid of the guy. You gave him the benefit of the doubt once. You can't do it again just a few weeks later. And now all of this, and so West Virginia, they released a statement saying that they would not under any circumstances reinstate Bob Huggins and that they would defend themselves from any kind of allegations coming against them. I actually feel bad for the university here because this is a mess that they're in. And honestly, it's really not their doing. It's Bob Huggins' doing.
West Virginia doesn't have any fault in this. Like I don't. I agree with you. Like it's going to make it near impossible to have any sort of relationship after the fact, right? Like
that's the sad thing.
You're taking away the university's ability to say, you know what, we'll welcome you back to these games with open arms. We want you in the stands. Like nobody would have had a problem with that.
Yeah,
but you can't do that now.
Think about like Jim Boeheim at Syracuse and, Krzyzewski at Duke and Roy Williams at North Carolina. Like, and Krzyzewski's different because he's not, that's not his alma mater at Duke, but he was there for 40 some years. Like Roy Williams is a North Carolina guy, and the fact that he's been retired and you spot him in the stands and he's like an ambassador, like a legacy member, of that organization. We're not going to see that with Bob Huggins in West Virginia more than likely.
Not that that was ever his personality.
Not at all. But I mean, you think of nationally, right? Like just beloved head coaches. Bob Huggins isn't really on that list. However, up until now, he's been beloved in Morgantown, and that's all that mattered. And I think they're on the outs, and it's going to be really hard to come back from that.
When I first saw this, my ears perked up, and I was like, well, this is really curious here, because if they can make a case that wasn't indeed him that sent that letter or whatever, and look, the university has as much firepower legally as Bob Huggins can hire. Yeah. And by the way, it sounds like this is a different attorney than the attorney he's always used his whole life, so who knows what is going on behind the scenes. But the second I saw that there was a called team meeting where Huggins informed his players and the team that he was resigning, that's where I was like, well, I don't even understand legally what he thinks he's going to be able to pull off, because the defense on that is, easy. Like, you told your players you were resigning, so clearly you did have that intention. Case closed, right? Like, it's not.
Right.
It's not now. It's like my ears aren't even perked up. Now it's just like, oh man.
And I don't know if he got bad advice or, before this formal resignation, because one of the things that he is claiming through his attorney is that he entered rehab, which is good. I'm glad he did because he clearly needed it, right? So he's currently, I guess, in rehab right now, and his attorney said that he has fully intended on resuming his post as head coach when he completes the rehab program. So I don't know if he was given bad advice or if he misunderstood the terms of what was going on. I don't know if maybe at some point there was a conversation of, if you enter rehab and you complete the program, then you can come back. I have no idea the inner workings of all of this, but that part of it does make me sad, right? That he's clearly dealing with some interpersonal issues. He has for a long time. It's not the first time he's had a DUI. This is his second one, and clearly felt like he needed to get some help for it, entered rehab. And I don't know if he thought, hey, if I go to rehab, maybe there's a chance I can come back. That's obviously not the case.
Yeah, well, that wasn't going to happen anyway. Like, West Virginia was in the free and clear when he resigned. Like, it was like, whew, okay, now we don't have to make that brutal decision. That's an absolute lose-lose for this university. And so now that they're clear of it, and maybe too, it's just some of Huggins and his camp saying, let's see if we can't take advantage of the fact that the public would be on your side here. But I'm not sure the public's going to be on the side now, as this is just like spiraled into this sort of like weird thing, right? It's like,
How do you feel about, because I'm really conflicted on this. How do you feel about Bob Huggins' legacy after this? I mean, the entire, the terrible couple months and then him demanding to be reinstated. Like, do you think that this has damaged his overall legacy?
Not really. It will probably in the minds of like historians, journalists to some degree, because we, will hang on to that and remember that stuff a little better. But to the general public or to West Virginia, I would say very little. I don't think 5-10 years from now, if somebody's challenging, some of his win records or anything like that, it'll even be brought up. They're not going to say, yeah, Bob Huggins, who had all those wins and was so great for the university. But remember now, he had a really rocky ending. Like, not much of it. I don't think it will be much of a factor.
I think you were on vacation when all of this went down originally. And so I remember Paul and I, discussed it. And one thing Paul brought up that, I don't know. I'm conflicted on this, and I think I would lean towards, no. But the thought of, could there potentially be ramifications with his Hall of Fame induction? I mean, the fact he is a Naismith Basketball Hall of Famer, and should there be some kind of morality clause where, you're potentially removed from the Hall of Fame ranks if you do something to damage the credibility of the Hall of Fame? So, that's been a discussion. I don't think it's going to happen, but I know that that's at least been speculated a little bit.
Has he damaged the credibility of the Hall of Fame?
I think you could make an argument if you're a Hall of Fame member that you might be better off not having him in the Hall of Fame anymore.
Is Bobby Knight a Naismith Hall of Famer?
Yes.
He'll be fine.
Yeah.
Huggins will be fine.
Yeah.
Bobby Knight, like, physically hurt people and was violent, right? Like, Huggins will be fine. He'll be just fine. Now, I'm not downplaying what he did. More egregious in the second case of being that hammered, allegedly, and driving.
Now, I think that if tragically something had happened, might be a little bit different.
Yep, I agree. Which is why that is. I'm not trying to downplay that, but it didn't, and I think that there are plenty of checkered pasts in a Hall of Fame that would at least rival Huggins's now recent checkered past. I think he'll be fine. I really I don't think that this is going to become a part of the Bob Huggins conversation very much at all, as we get probably just even a year or two clear of whatever the mess that's currently being stirred up is resolved, which I think is just going to be a total they can.
I just wish that
they'll lose.
I want to see him get healthy. Obviously, I wish that he had kind of ridden off into the sunset quietly. Understood that there needed to be, he needed some help and needed some professional intervention, and looks like he's getting it, which is good. I would have rather seen him ride off quietly, get the help he needs, get healthy, and then I think could be welcome back with open arms. I see him. I think he could be a great broadcaster if he wanted to do that for a couple of seasons. There are some other paths out there that I think would be awesome for him. I hate to see it go down like this.
Yeah, and it's, he's 69. He could have coached for a while still, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, he clearly hadn't lost anything. His teams were good. He just put together the second best transfer class in the country behind Kansas, according to most accounts. It's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate because he still had plenty left in the tank from a basketball perspective, but from a personal perspective, obviously, some things have got to change.
Yep.
From the comments on the air, it's just like that. When that happened, you're like,
it was jarring.
Does that happen?
Yep.
How do you even get there is one thing, but how you say it live on the air, you're just like, what? That doesn't even make sense. And then, the DUI doesn't not make sense because there's a little bit of a history there. But, man, it's too bad. We'll see where this goes. We'll continue to follow it. Basically, he's saying he didn't really resign, even though he did resign, according to West Virginia. And he's trying to get his job back, which, again, if he really had a team meeting, he ain't going to get his job back. I don't think he is anyway. But that almost puts the nail in the coffin of that. Congratulations to Mark for winning some tickets to the latest Mission Impossible movie. By the way, Odyssey and KYN bring you Concerts in the Park, which are sponsored by IHOP. Free live music Friday from 8 to 10 in Andover Central Park at the Capitol Federal Amphitheater. This Friday, lucky people. Bring your lawn chairs, blankets, extra cash for the food trucks. No coolers allowed. Gates open at 6:30. I'm happy to do that as a part of that fun concerts outside. Enjoy the weather. You had good weather if it hadn't been raining. It hadn't been hot. We'll come back. More Sports Daily right after this.
I don't know. I think he's got a little bit of a leash to get ready because this is, a different environment for him. It'd be different if this was a kid that was coming out of college or a kid coming from the G League. He's coming from overseas, and he looks different than, any other player in the NBA right now. And so I'm okay with giving him a little bit of a leash. I know that people were absolutely freaking out after his debut, and he didn't really have a great showing. But he even admitted after the game that he's learning how to do things, and he didn't really know what he was doing out there. That's the biggest thing. Not to get super philosophical about the NBA Summer League, but one of the reasons why I dislike it so much is that you're literally pulling these players from the draft and then right away putting them on the stage, where I know that Summer League it's not like they're nationally like primetime televised games with a lot at stake, but you're putting them under the microscope right away. There's really no opportunity to train, to work with your teammates and your coaches and all of that. It's basically like, hey, Wembanyama, we drafted you. Okay, now go and do your thing. It's kind of like on the job training as you go kind of thing. So I think he's got a little bit of a leash, at least in my opinion, to figure some things out.
Yeah, it was my fear coming in. Like he had a shoot around and didn't shoot it around well, and people freaked out.
It's like,
and
who
my
cares?
My fear with him has always been that people aren't going to allow him to grow. Like the different, like he's this high ceiling prospect, and I get all that, and it's very obvious why he is, but people always want to try to like make the comparison to like somebody like LeBron James coming out of high school. And I'm like, if your eyes don't tell you that no matter what type of player Wembanyama turns into, which is probably going to be a great one, like to compare that to what LeBron James did in his rookie year, LeBron James weighed like 290 pounds or something. Like he looked like an NBA player. Wembanyama doesn't look like an NBA player, yet he has to have some time to grow physically.
And, let's compare the NBA draft process and all of that with what happens in the NFL and then even in Major League Baseball. So in Major League Baseball, we talked about it earlier in the show. You get drafted, you go to the minors, you can develop. There's really not a whole lot of pressure on your shoulders, and it is what it is. In the NFL, you get drafted. You might play in week 1, but at least you go through OTAs and mini camp and training camp and preseason. In the NBA, you get drafted. Good luck, go play. Go play against the top level competition. Good luck. Good luck. We're gonna watch you, see how it goes, and we're gonna criticize you from day one.
I will say that it is the sport that's the most advantageous to do that because, like for Wembanyama, he's been playing professionally for a while, so The summer league shouldn't be that big a deal for him. Now the NBA will be when he plays his first NBA game, right? Regardless of what he does in the summer league. Like once you get to the NBA, it's a little bit different, but. It's fine. I don't have any problem putting expectations on him. I do, though, and have been concerned for a while that people – and this is why San Antonio, by the way, is the absolute perfect place for him to be. People will freak a little quicker with him because of the amount of hype he has had now for about 18 months. But Greg Popovich will fall on and handle any grenade that comes there locally. Because Greg Popovich has the sort of hold on the market like a college coach might have, right? In a smaller market. Like,
right.
It's the only place, too, in the NBA where that exists. There are no other places where the coach is the biggest star. That's what Popovich is. So he can deflect and handle some of that. And the other thing about the Spurs and in the community, they adore them so much. They don't take for granted the fact that they have them. It's a I don't want to say it's a privilege that they're able to have a pro team, but it sort of is, right? It's not like where it's such a big market they're just going to have one. So I do think there is a little more forgiveness there too. And the organization obviously has a track record. Like they've earned that respect and time and everything else. But nationally, and look, in his second game, he had 27, 12, and 3 blocks. Like, if he keeps doing that in the summer league, everyone's going to be like, all right, this guy's going to be great. I just don't, when he has a bad shooting night or something, like, give the kid a break for a second.
Right. I don't have any issue having expectations on Wembanyama, and I do. I've got expectations on him to be a superstar. I've got no issue with that at all. I just don't have a lot of expectations in the summer league. Let him play, let him develop, let him get ready to go. When the regular season starts at that point, all right, like I'm ready to rock and roll.
I don't even know, but I don't know what my expectations are for the regular season this year either. Like, I don't know. I don't think there is
I think
high.
Rookie of the Year is probably on the table, I would think.
Sure.
As somebody to, have some individual success. The other thing, by the way, with Greg Popovich, I don't know if you saw this, just signed a new 5-year deal to remain as the coach of the Spurs. I wonder how much of that
which we could all
was
see
inspired by Wembanyama.
A million miles away. What was when they won the lottery? The first thing I said is Pop's going to coach forever. You don't walk away from that if you're a coach.
Right.
And look, like I guess if Victor Wembanyama comes out and scores like 15 points, 10, 12 rebounds, a couple blocks a game in his rookie year, I'm going to be like, okay, fine. Like, that doesn't really have anything with his trajectory. Now, I think he'll be better than that. I think and that's why people like him, right? He just like will naturally fall into more than that, especially on a bad team. But glad to see him doing well in the summer league, so we don't have to have a conversation. 869-1240. We'll come back. We'll wrap up Sports Daily right after this.
Friend, is your pavement broken down, worn out, potholed, and buckled? Are those once clear lines now fuzzy and faded? Is what once was smooth and solid now lined and cracked? Well, friend, there is an answer, and it's not too late. You must be paved. Yes, call this number, 316-9...
This is the summer to expand your horizons. It's time to explore. But before you set foot out the door, set foot in the ultimate lightweight, super packable travel shoes from Allbirds. Find your perfect pair at allbirds.com. That's ALLBIRDS.com.